Tired of outdated marketing advice aimed at the industrial and manufacturing space? My name is Selim Malouf. Join me and my co-host Chris Carolyn as we deliver candid insights from growth-minded leaders, helping you drive results and tackle modern challenges. Cut through the noise to get no-nonsense expertise. Welcome to the Manufacturing Marketing Show. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another one of these lovely shows, Manufacturing Marketing Podcast. Our guest today, as head of Storybrand, Dr. JJ Peterson, has used the Storybrand Framework to help thousands of organizations clarify their message in order to grow their business. He holds a PhD in communication and has spent the last 20 years practicing and teaching communication theory. JJ has served in marketing and PR for two multinational nonprofit organizations, served as a communication professor, and has spoken to thousands of people about creating a clear message. JJ will help your team understand the power of story and how to use a repeatable process to create clear messages that can be used for any product or services. JJ, thank you for being our guest and welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Here at Conveyor Message, we're big fans of Storybrand. But for those out there who are not familiar with Storybrand, can you tell us a bit about what Storybrand is?
Yeah. So after working with thousands of different companies, we've just seen over and over and over again that most companies are wasting an enormous amount of money on marketing because their message is not clear. And one of the big things that we see a lot is that companies often think that they have to talk a lot about their products and service in a way that makes them stand out in the marketplace. So they're just like talking about the features that they have and the benefits that they have and why they're better. And in reality, what that is doing is it's actually turning off your customers, which is really antithetical to what a lot of people think marketing should be, but it's true. There's a lot of research around the idea of that people usually don't remember very much when it comes to facts. People don't remember very much when people talk just exclusively about themselves. And when you can actually position a product or service in a way that makes the customer the hero of the story and not the company, people actually pay more attention. And so what we do is we teach people to create stories that are compelling, marketing stories that are compelling, messaging that is clear, and we use a story framework. So we actually use ancient, they're still used today, but long time used principles when it comes to how to tell good stories and how to actually move people to action. So we use those story frameworks to help people clarify their message and connect with more customers.
Awesome. Yeah, I was introduced to Storybrand in 2017. It's been great bringing it into businesses. And I'm curious, like, before we get into some details, like, can you tell us about when it clicked for you, and then maybe when the point was like, okay, maybe I can make a PhD out of this thing?
Yeah, I know. Because when I tell people, ask me like what my PhD is in, and I say, well, it's actually in storytelling, basically. And the title is actually, it's a PhD in communication, but I really studied narrative theory. And where it came from, truthfully, was my background. I did public relations, I did marketing, and I came right out of college, and I started working for, at the time, was the largest short-term missions organization in the world. And what they did is they actually took groups down into Central and South America to build homes, hospitals, and schools, and like revolutionized really neighborhoods and saved people's lives. It was kind of an unbelievable thing. And here I was, a 22-year-old kid tasked with telling that story and tasked with trying to get people to donate and be involved. And they had amazing stories. Like literally, you build a hospital, you save people's lives. It's not a hard story to tell, but it was hard for me. Because every time I was going to write a donation email, or every time I'm trying to get new customers, or every time I'm trying to build a website or make an offer or do a quote unquote sales pitch, I felt like I was starting from scratch. And that was really my like feet on the ground, like introduction into storytelling and marketing. And I knew early on that if I could tell good stories, that I could get more people involved and literally save more lives. And that is where kind of things started for me, is I just started realizing there's power in story and there's power in telling compelling stories. And so from there, I had a career I did a lot of speaking. I actually did improv comedy for a while and did some screenwriting. I did some stuff in Hollywood, and I just began to study story more and more and more. And I actually did my master's in what's called theology in the arts. So study of people's theological perspectives in film and television. And then that even got me more into understanding how the power of story was used to compel people. And I decided I wanted to teach people how to do that. So that's what I started my dissertation in, well, my PhD in, was really a study of story. And as I dove into that, I know this is kind of a little long version to get to it, but as I dove into that, I discovered this principle called narrative transportation. Narrative transportation is the idea that when you experience a good story, you actually put yourself into the story. So if you've ever been in a movie and you've jumped when something was scary, or you've laughed when something was funny, or you cried when something was sad, you've experienced narrative transportation. You actually put yourself in the movie, like emotionally. Well, the research goes on to say that basically the better the story, the more people experience narrative transportation. Then it goes even further to say that when people experience high levels of narrative transportation, then ultimately that story has a bigger impact on their thoughts and their actions. So basically, the proof is that the better the story, the better the ability of that story is to change people's minds and change their actions. Now, that was true and very obvious. There was a ton of research around it behind how that works in movies and books. But what I started diving into and discovered through it is that there was actually research behind that is not only true in movies and books, but it's true in marketing. That when people experience narrative transportation in marketing, so they see themselves in the story the company is telling, that story then has a more powerful impact on the way they think and the way they act, meaning they connect more and they buy more from you. Now, what that means is that most companies are telling the wrong story. Because when they're telling a marketing story, they're trying to tell their own story. This is what we do. This is what we are capable of. This is how great we are. This is how we are different in the marketplace. Well, if people are more likely to change their mind in action if they experience narrative transportation, and you are telling your story in your marketing, then me as a customer, I don't see myself in that story. I see your story. So it might be a nice story and I might be intrigued and want to learn more about you, but I don't know how that impacts me. And it actually doesn't, like the research actually shows, it doesn't change my mind in action. But if you change the way you start telling stories and position the customer as the hero, so you're actually understanding what is it that your customer wants and how do I speak to that? What problems are my customers experiencing? And how do I speak to that? What plan or path forward can I give my customers for them to win the day? And how do I even show through that whole process what winning looks like for my customer, not what winning looks like for me, or what failure looks like for my customer, not for me? When I can do that in my marketing, then I position my customer as the hero. They see themselves in the story, and it actually has influence on their thoughts and their actions. So that's really where things shifted for me big time in my PhD, is that before I thought I'm just going to think about movies and myth and all this stuff. And then I realized, oh, you actually have the ability to move people to action when you position them as the hero of the story in your marketing. And it's actually not as hard as people think it is.
I love every single bit of that. And you talk about getting narrative transportation, and we believe wholeheartedly 100% in it. But Chris and I have been in a lot of conference rooms where there are a lot of people who are experts in, the most efficient ball bearings or an industrial hydraulic pump. Sometimes those conversations everybody's following when we're talking about, a nonprofit or, a B2C product that actually impacts people's lives directly. They're able to follow us in that conversations, but suddenly when we start talking about that dry, boring industrial product that sometimes is just a small part of a larger picture, sometimes we lose them. I'm interested in your experience, teaching Storybrand all across the globe in all of these industries. How do you approach Storybrand in the case where the product is not easy to get excited about?
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's like, well, how are we going to make this ball bearing sexy? Well, the nice thing is about the Storybrand framework is you don't have to make it sexy. That's what's actually kind of what I love about this framework, is because the story really ultimately is not about the ball bearing. The story or the manufacturing of the ball bearing or the distribution of the ball bearing, that's your story as a manufacturer. That's what you want to tell, is how great your ball bearing is, how great your equipment is that creates it, how you can get it to them fast, all of these things. And the reality is that's your story as a manufacturer. What you need to start with is actually, what problem is your customer experiencing that your manufacturing has the ability to solve? So specifically, if you're talking about selling your company as being the people that are going to make these expert ball bearings, you don't walk in and say, we have the best ball bearings in the world and we're going to get them to you faster than anybody else. No. You start with a customer problem. So what problems are they currently experiencing? What problems are they not even aware that they're experiencing? Or what problems can you solve for them that save them money or save them time, right? So you have to start with a problem. And when you start with a customer problem, what you're doing is immediately positioning the customer or the people in the room as the heroes of the story. When you walk in and start talking about the ball bearing, you're positioning yourself as the hero. And so the fastest way to get people to experience narrative transportation is by naming a problem that they're experiencing. So, I'll take it out of this space for a second, but if I'm going to, I kind of did it on here. You asked me, tell me about Storybrand. And I'll just pull back the curtain. I didn't tell you about Storybrand. I told you about the problems that a lot of our customers experience. They're wasting a ton of money on marketing because they're not telling the right story. And then I illustrated it a little bit more by talking about being a fresh-faced kid out of college, not knowing how to create websites or emails or sales pitches, right? What I'm doing in that situation, it's very intentional. It's true. It's not manipulative. It's true. It's just, it even feels like I'm telling you my story, but I'm actually not. I'm telling you your story, and I'm telling you I'm telling your audience their story, because they probably are struggling, right? They've been in that room and they know they have the best manufactured ball bearings in the world, and they're losing deals, right? And it's like, why are we losing deals? We have the best and we're at a competitive price and we can make it and we can get it to it fast. Why do we keep losing these deals? Well, it's because other people know how to tell the story better. And what you have to do is position your product or service in a way that makes your customer the hero. And the way that you do that first, the very first thing you do is when you're sitting down to write an email, when you're sitting down to write a website, when you're sitting down to write a proposal, if you're even going into a room with a keynote or a PowerPoint presentation, your very first thing you do, the very first slide, the very first sentence you write, the very first sentence you say should have nothing to do with your company. It should have everything to do with the problem you are going to solve for the customers that are in the room. If you can start with that, you're going to hook your audience, hook your customers. They now know why they need to pay attention to you, and then they will listen the rest of the time. But if you don't position it as their story, then no narrative transportation. You're interesting, you're cool, but we're not going any further.
So that's all well and good. And I've had success, covering that, right? And so just to like kind of finish the journey really quickly, we've got a character in our customer. We've figured out what their problem is. We're positioning ourselves as the guide and helping that solve that problem with, our product or service. A plan to work with us, includes a call to action for how to take the next steps, and then talking about results, both from a success standpoint and a failure standpoint if they don't move forward, with our guidance, with our help. So it can be frustrating, as you can imagine, when we do the work to figure out all these elements through customer conversations. And then we've had challenges where it's like, oh, we need to keep it positive. We can't, like, yes, the current products they might be using might start on fire randomly and might explode and might cause harm and might cost lots of money, but we can't really talk about that. And so can you tell us the danger of what happens when you don't talk about that?
Well, first, I want to say you are clearly astute when it comes to the Storybrand Framework because you named all the elements of a good story. So you did. So, listeners, what Chris did when he was kind of going through that is what we do is we come in and we use, I've said we used a framework, which is basically there are 7 elements of a good story. And Chris just named all 7 of those. So he walked through and basically what we help companies do is identify talking points for all of those. And
for transparency, I'm a Business Made Simple certified coach,
yeah.
and I needed to pass that test on this interview. So,
well, you did. You passed it with flying colors. So well done, well done. So that and what you illustrated there is that's really what a full story is: talking points that hit all those elements of a customer story. And the last 2 that you mentioned, success and failure, the tragic results or successful results that people experience, are what in the story world what we call the stakes of the story. So in a movie, there's always something at stake for the hero, something that the audience can root for the hero to win. So we kind of have an idea of what success looks like. They're going to hit the home run. They're going to get the girl. They're going to get the promotion. They're going to win the race. We have a picture that we're rooting for. But there also has to be some negative stakes in the story for the story to be interesting. Meaning there has to be negative stakes for it to have any urgency or us to want to find out, is this going to happen? Because for instance, if say Tom Cruise is running through the airport and he's going to destroy a bomb that before it's going to blow up an entire airport. And then all of a sudden, halfway through his run, he realizes that he hears that the bomb is just full of baby powder and it actually is just kind of a prank. Well, he's done running. There's no urgency for the hero to actually keep moving, right? And we're done with the story. Then it's kind of okay, I guess Tom Cruise just walks around the airport and buys, Doritos and cheese sticks. It's it's not an interesting story, and there has to be something at stake. And that is an element when you have strong stakes in a story, in a movie. People will pay attention, they will be on the edge of their seat, and they will see if heroes can actually avoid those negative experiences and win the day. Well, it's the same thing with your customers. In order to hook them into the story and keep things interesting, you have to have stakes in the story. So what are the positive results that they're going to experience when they use your product or service, when they hire you as their manufacturer? You do want to talk about that. So you want to keep things very positive. But if there's no negative stakes in the story, there's actually no urgency to act, right? Because if the only thing is they're delaying the positive, then it's kind of well, we can get around to it in a month, or we can get around to it in a year, or we can get around to it in 5 years, because there's nothing at stake in the story. But if literally, like you talked about, that they're going to catch people on fire, people may get hurt and die. Now, waiting 5 years to fix that is actually not an option. We have to act now. There is some urgency in the story. So you have to have a little bit of that. When I teach people to do this, depending on the type of product or service they're offering, typically what we say is, if you think of different talking points in your presentation and your marketing as ingredients for a loaf of bread, success and like the positivity is like flour in the bread. You want a lot of it, but failure or the negative consequences, negative stakes, needs to be the salt. If it's not in the recipe isn't going to work. But too much, so you don't have any, the bread doesn't work. If you have too much, the bread doesn't work. You just need a little bit. You need to sprinkle some in. You can do that by asking questions, even in your presentation, almost rhetorical questions like, are you worried about this? Are you tired of this? Do you ever struggle about this? Do you stay up at night wondering about this, right? And you just can drop those questions in versus saying, you're going to catch people on fire and kill them if you don't change it. That's a little aggressive, and it may be true. Like, that may be true, but people are going to tune you out because they think it's being too aggressive and it's being too dramatic, truthfully. And so you have to you can ask questions in your presentation or email. You can say, or you can even say, like, stop staying up at night worrying if stuff's going to catch on fire, or stop, and stop worrying about this, or stop being afraid of this. But you only have to put a couple of those in there. It's just sprinkle a little bit of salt. But if they're not there, there's no urgency. That's really the key. It's not an interesting story, and there's no urgency for them to act because they're not going to avoid any pain. And just kind of to wrap that a little bit, there's a lot of statistics, or that's not statistics, research out there that shows that people are more likely to act to avoid pain or struggle than they are to avoid to gain something positive. And actually, it's people are more likely to act if they're afraid of losing $10 than they are if they are going to gain 100. So that's actually people are 10 times more likely to act if they're trying to avoid some kind of pain. So you actually have to, because that's a survival mechanism for us. And so you have to talk about it in the story or people won't pay attention.
It's interesting the way you describe it, because we've had instances, Chris and I, where the audience research, in fact, the customer research, kind of gives us some great points about what keeps customers up at night. In specific industries where a maintenance manager stays up at night because the equipment is at risk of catching on fire if not monitored properly. And whenever we're in workshops to put together messaging, especially for public channels like your website, like your paid media, like your social media, there seems to be this aversion of, this is scary language, we don't want to engage in it, even if this is the actual direct truth from the horse's mouth, and opting for generic, it gives you more efficiency, safe, basically safe language gives you more efficiency, more lifetime of your equipment, and just dodging the whole conversation around this equipment might actually endanger people, and that's why there's regulation around monitoring it, and not because it may save you a couple of dollars if it runs more efficiently.
Yeah. And if I could just piggyback on that, obviously this process helps the sales conversation too. And that's not, obviously, sales guys one-on-one, they have no problem, addressing the negative impact of you not choosing the solution. But the challenge comes when we have to put the message, out there in an uncontrolled format on our website or in social. And I think as we have to do that more on social, that's really where I see the need to do that, Because when you're seeing a feed that is full of fluffy, like highest quality, most reliable, like, cut your total cost of ownership by 10 by like 90%, like it just all blends together. And without that like break, while not being sensational about it and clickbaity, right, without that negative break, I mean, you just blend right in. So what do you have any cases you could share, or maybe advice as to way to, like, not dive into the deep end, but maybe do some initial, like, dipping the toe in the water here?
Yeah, when I'm working with companies and we're coming up with talking points, just a very basic rule is I come up with twice as many successful results than I do negative results. Just purely as a principle to remind them, your images on social media for the most part should be smiley happy people. It should be good stuff. It should be like people will experience narrative transportation when they see somebody smiling. Like, think about when you're taking somebody's picture and you're like trying to tell them to smile, you start smiling, right? You're actually, when you see a smiling person, you start smiling. That's true in marketing, that's true in social media, all that stuff. So I always, just as a pure principle baseline, is twice as many positive as negative. So don't go beyond that, for sure. And another kind of principle in the way that you talk about it is, I'd like to talk about, think in terms of short-term and long-term success and failure. So short-term success is, let's say, like, okay, let's use your example of the maintenance person having to stay up all night because they're afraid that it's going to catch on fire. Short-term success is they are more confident, they're more relaxed, they can trust the equipment, and they get to sleep. Short-term failure is they're missing a night's sleep. Okay. Long-term success is you get a good night's sleep, which means you're actually going to be able to be more present on a regular basis. You're going to be able to grow the company, create new innovative ways of working through the manufacturing, the maintenance, all that stuff. You can kind of go long-term, like once they get a good night's sleep, what's that going to mean for them down the road? With short-term failure is you don't get a good night's sleep, which means you're going to miss more things, which means the warehouse may burn down, right? Now we're getting into long-term failure. I try to stay in the short-term failure as much as possible. So instead of saying like people are going to die because your stuff failed, you're actually more speaking to the fact that he missed a night of sleep. So you're just dealing with the immediate, like, once you hire us or once you sign with us, you are actually going to immediately start to gain more confidence in the equipment. You're going to be able to get good night's sleep. You're going to be able to trust other people to do the job for you, so you don't have to be there every second of the day. And that's kind of it. That kind of in that success and failure space for the failure. So that's one of the things I look at, is just speak to the short-term failure of not working with you instead of going long-term. Because long-term is you don't do this and your plant burns down and people die. Well, nobody wants to think about that. So when you put something that negative in their mind, their mind turns off. It's actually, their brain is designed to not think about that hard of a negative. So now they're actually done listening. So when we're talking about failure, the reality is people could die if you don't change out this equipment. You have to be very careful about going that far down the road. If you're going to talk about that because it's a genuine, real thing, try to get them to talk about it versus you. And use words like imagine. Like, if I'm talking to somebody, I might say something like, so imagine if you don't fix this and you have to continue missing nights of sleep because you can't trust it. What's going to happen? And get them to say it versus you going, this is what's going to happen. You're going to die in early age and everybody's going to hate you. No, we can't do that. We can't go that harsh with it. So So those are just a couple of the principles. Now, all of this is really, just to be very honest, it's a little bit art, right? You get to kind of play with it and be creative a little bit. There's no hard and fast rule about story as far as like what the end result needs to look like, right? What I'm talking about is like teaching you or talking about what are the notes to music, and then it's your job to make it a song, right? But some of the ways that I talk about it just very practically are always in marketing, try to do at least double the successful results compared to failure when you're talking about those two things. So that's, if you're talking about social media, I would actually in social media go like 3-1, 3 positives to 1 negative. And that's not a rule, but that's a suggestion. Then the other thing is think in terms of short-term and long-term when it comes to success and failure. With success, you can do short-term success and then long-term. So what happens when they start working with you? How is their life going to be better? And what then does that mean for them a year down the road, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road? That's short-term, long-term success. With failure, primarily go to short-term and then maybe go like, what does that mean? If they don't fix this, what does that mean in 6 months? But don't go a year, don't go 5 years, because that's going to feel too manipulative and they'll stop listening.
Okay. So I think, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I think one of our last conversations, you mentioned, direct versus indirect messaging. And it sounds like that finding short-term failure points, what you were describing there, was that an example of some kind of indirect messaging related to the product?
A little bit. Direct messaging is saying is more like you have the potential to fail, and so does your plant, which means people might die, right? That's real direct messaging. And here's the reality when it comes to direct communication: if there is an emergency, you can't beat around the bush. Like if you walk in and you discover that if they don't fix this thing this week, people are going to die, you have to be direct about that. So what I'm talking about is kind of like, when we're talking about potential, but if you walk in and this place is this far from killing 5 people, you better be direct. Don't try to tell a story. Don't beat around the bush. Indirect communication is more, instead of just going like, if you don't fix this, people will die. It's really talking about asking questions. So like the thing that I did of saying imagine if you don't fix this, what's life going to be like for you? Getting them to tell you, that's called indirect communication, because you're not directly telling them people are going to die. They're telling you. So it's indirect. You're getting them to say what you want them to say without saying it directly. So asking questions, telling stories about other people who've experienced some of the similar things that they are experiencing. Even humor is a form of indirect communication. So instead of being harsh about things, being more funny a little bit, you can be a little more funny. You use analogies, use stories, you use questions. Because that actually allows people to open up a little bit more. Because sometimes if you're talking to that maintenance manager and you go, hey, if you don't fix this, people are going to die. Well, that maintenance manager is going to shut down because you're actually attacking them in that moment, and that's what they're going to feel. So that's a direct way. And if it's an emergency, you have to do that. But if it's not an emergency, then asking questions, getting them to express to you what's going on, getting them to express your problems, and then positioning your products and service as a way to solve those fears and problems that they're experiencing, that's indirect.
Okay. Thank you for breaking that down. Because what's, sometimes sad to see is that, some of these manufacturers are super innovative, new kid on the block, and they've got to fight against the status quo that has not been good for the industry as a whole. But trying to break through all the things you need to break through without being able to talk about the why, and because usually these new products specifically solve for that thing in a way that's never been seen before. And if you don't spend any time associating it with the with the stakes, with the negative stakes, like you're definitely going to have a tough time breaking through from what I've seen.
Yeah,
So.
absolutely.
I'm interested. You talked about, that maintenance manager and how like there are different people in the buying committee. In cases where, marketing has done its job and transported one part of the buying committee, and they're full on board and they're ready and they are now, your internal advocate, but there's some other level, be it an executive or be it maybe a user who's not really motivated by the same things, like their life is different. um, how would a team approach that? And if they're resource limited and they can't, you know do 5 websites, one for each, how do you strike a balance between trying to talk to uh, different individuals in the buyer committee for a customer?
Yeah. So there's a couple different ways of approaching that. So when you're doing your main marketing, your website, when you're out there with kind of say advertising or social media presence, you're really going at the broadest story possible, right? So how do you actually solve this problem primarily for, say, the company, because you're like a little bit more B2B, right? You can sell directly to a maintenance manager or something like that, but in reality, most of them are probably not the final buyer or the final say in the buyer. It's the higher ups. And so you really want to think of not the necessarily, and it really, this depends on every business, but for the most part, I would say when you as a company, as a manufacturer, are thinking of who is my customer, so here, who is the hero of my story, it is the company you're selling to. The company is the hero, not the specific maintenance person, not the CEO, not the accountant. It is the company as a whole. So what problems do you solve for the company as a whole? That's your baseline, like biggest umbrella, how you're going to reach the most people. Now, when you're obviously face to face, there's different ways of getting in with those people and learning the problems and who do we need to talk to and things like that. So what I will often do is, if, let's say, there's a lot of times where I'm working with, we come in and do private workshops with companies. So I'll spend 2 days with a company helping them clarify their message. And the person who contacted me is the marketing director, but the person who signs the check is the CEO. So when I'm on the phone with the marketing director on that initial call, it's my standard messaging. But if I find out that then they have to go to their CEO, then what I'm doing is I'm creating either a PDF or a slideshow or a video that I'm going to give that person to take to their CEO. So that's one way you can do it, is create collateral that, say you have 4 different buyer personas that ultimately are on the broad scale. These are the 4 types of people that we have to get a yes from, but we're usually starting with only one of the 4. Well, you can create collateral, a slideshow, a video, a PDF that can then be given to the person you're talking to give to other people. That's one way of doing it. Another way is to create lead generators on social media and with paid advertising that solve a specific problem for one of those different buyers, right? So if you are going to target a maintenance manager, you're going to create a PDF that is 3 ways to, or 3 things that keep maintenance managers up at night that you can avoid easily. Something like that. And you then, on social media and on Google or on Facebook, you are targeting maintenance managers. And that's it. That specifically goes to them. And then you also want to target supervisors. You also want to target CEOs. You also want to target, whoever you want to target. You can create different PDFs or lead generators for them so that when somebody downloads that, when somebody downloads the thing for maintenance managers, you're talking to a maintenance manager. So you have more info on them when you get on that first call or send that first email. If it's a CEO PDF, you know that you're getting a CEO on the phone, right? So those are two quick ways of either creating resources that you can give to the initial contact that then can go to other people, or create resources that can go out to get leads from those specific contacts. But your overall messaging on your website, social media, should probably target the company as a whole.
Right. And what's funny, and the beautiful thing about this framework is that it helps you break it down at each level. I think the important part is understanding the who, like how many people are there. And because what's interesting is there's almost, whether it's a manufacturing product or a service, even without this framework, they naturally they have benefits like, longest lasting, sustainability, and, half the cost of ownership, right? So that's sustainability, marketing, brand loves that. Maybe even the CEO has that. Longest lasting, reliable quality, engineers, they want to know about that. And then total cost, like high purchasing team, like let's get in here. Yep. But don't talk to the purchasing team about sustainability. Okay.
Yes. Because you're not right? Solving that problem for them. Yes, exactly.
Right. So, as we kind of wrap up here, like what is the first thing that, a company should do if they've been either struggling with their messaging, or just they know it's not like they do have this just world changing product and they are not getting the traction that they should be? What's the first thing they do?
The first thing I would say is just stop talking about your product and start talking about your customer problems. That is the number one tip I can give, and really is foundational to everything that we teach. Is as a team, or as a marketing division, or as any sales team, I want you to just stop and sit down and start writing down, what are the problems that my customers are experiencing that my product solves, and start there. And if you can make a list of those, and then ultimately for your overall message, narrow down like what umbrella do the majority of our customers fit under? Because you may look at this and go, well, this problem is actually only 5% of our customers. This is 10%, but this is really 80% of our customers fit under this one. That's your one. That's your big problem that you need to be talking about over and over and over again on your website, in your sales pitches, and on your social media. So that's really, I would just say, if you're not going to even work with anybody else, hire you guys, hire us, you can do that on your own, right? What are the problems my customers are experiencing that my product solves? For us, if you are interested in kind of going a little bit deeper into the Storybrand framework itself, we actually have a tool that the listeners can use. It's called a brand script. And what it is it really is this tool, basically one piece of paper where you write down the 7 talking points of your customer story. So what are the 7 talking points that are ultimately going to lead to all the messaging you're going to use in your marketing? And we have a free version of that at storybrand.com/brand script. So brand script is one word, but storybrand.com/brand script. And you can go on there and you can sign up and you can get a free version, and you can just start playing in that a little bit. And it really shows you gives you space to write down what your customer problems are, what success looks like for them if their problems are solved, what failure looks like if their problems are not solved, and gives you a space to kind of start writing down these talking points that ultimately you can use to put on all of your marketing.
Anecdotally, I have a little story. My wife, who's an architect and a commercial real estate consultant, recently was putting together her portfolio, and that brand script was a tab that was always open to help her, put together the story in her portfolio for her to not for her to not be like, this is what I'm doing. No, these are the problems that I'm solving for these other people who will potentially be the customers that we were serving. So
Yeah. I love that. That makes me so happy.
So thank you so much, Dr. Peterson, for joining us here on the Manufacturing Marketing Podcast. I'm sure everybody knows how to find you, but for those who don't, where can they find you online?
Well, I have a podcast called Marketing Made Simple, so people can listen to that where I give kind of practical tips every week. So Marketing Made Simple podcast, and then I think I'm on all the socials as Dr. JJ Peterson. So I think you can find me on Instagram and LinkedIn and that with Dr. JJ Peterson.
Love it. Thank you so much. And for everybody listening to us this episode, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to see you in the next one. Bye.
Thanks so much, JJ.
Thanks, guys.